Once you have downloaded and installed Harmony Premium on your computer, you're ready to get going. So when you launch it, it always will begin with this starting screen where we have an option to create a new scene, or we can open an existing scene that we have previously created or downloaded. So when we create a scene, we get to give it a new name. So I'm going to name it, and then we can choose browse where we want to put it. So I'm going to make a new folder for it, though it helps to spell it correctly. And I will then select that folder to save it. So when we do this, one thing to keep in mind is when we create a new Harmony project, it's actually going to create a folder to contain the project file, our palettes, any assets we make, all the artwork that we draw on our different frames, everything that's part of that project. Now we can choose our other settings, our size, our frame rate, etc. Right now we'll just leave it at the default, and then we click on create scene. So it's at times you figure, visually you want to start and create a new scene, and then you see a button on the right and that says open, but that's for opening an existing scene. So now I'll click on create scene, and then we wait. So we got our little animation telling us what's happening as it comes up. Now when Harmony opens, your interface is going to look similar to mine. Mine is remembering how I had it configured the last time I had it open, so things may be a little bit different. So what we can do at any point, if you mess up, you close out a window, so you lose something and you're like, where is it? And your interface is all messed up. So it's not uncommon that you've made a mess out of things, as we can go under Windows and choose Restore Default Workspace. And then once I do that, it will think for a moment, and then it will restore that workspace. So at any point when you're working, if your interface, you realize your windows don't match what you see in a video, you've lost something that you're looking for, don't fret. Go under Windows and restore the workspace. Now if you want to, you can create custom workspaces, so you can customize it for doing something, and then you can use the defaults that they have here, or you can save your own workspace. Now that workspace will be saved on your computer. It does not get saved into the project file. So when we look at the workspace, we have our main camera area. This is where our artwork is going to exist. That will then show up on our timeline. The timeline is down at the bottom. We can see where we have our different frames for the animation. We have animation or timeline controls on the left here. We have our play. We can set it to looping, whether we want our sound to play once we've brought in sound. Notice, we do have, this is our frame indicator, so it's our current time indicator showing us what frame we're on, and it gives us the number over here. We can also target a specific frame. We can set our start and stop frames. We'll do that constantly. We'll be changing the start and stop as we build little animated loops so that we can watch small pieces animate. It's not a good idea to change your FPS or your frames per second while you're down here, because if you do that, when you export your movie, then it's going to default back to the project settings or scene settings of what you had when you created it, which as a default will be 24 frames per second. So that is something to keep in mind. So the frames, as we're looking at them, are just simply the drawing. So I have my tools on the left hand side over here. I have a color palette, so I can choose colors on the right side. So if I choose something like my paintbrush, now we have tool properties that show up over here, so we can now choose different options. So I have different brushes that I can choose, texture brushes, normal brushes. We have different settings that are available with them. If I want to customize it, I can double click on the brush. It brings up brush settings. So you see that there are lots of options available to us. So we can have it here as I work with this brush. Now I'm using the stylus, so it gives me pressure sensitivity. So you can see as I press lighter, get a thinner line, press harder, I get a fatter line. If I change the maximum size, then we get a more dramatic effect with that. So as we create these different marks with the paintbrush, one thing to keep in mind is by default everything in Harmony is vector. So what that means is a set of lines that I've drawn there, in effect an object. They're not pixels. I'm not painting pixels like I would in an image editing program like Clip Studio Paint or Photoshop. So this is more like working with Illustrator. So I can even select the white arrow and adjust the path or curve that is the element that I have drawn. If I want to draw with a different color, you can see how I can now choose that color. So a lot of this is just going to require some experimentation to start to get comfortable with the tools, to explore. Don't be afraid, you're not going to break things, and you just need to start to figure things out as you work. So we have our default colors. If you want to create a new color, you simply click on the plus and that gives a new color. I can double click on it and now your view, the default is the single wheel mode. I like the multiple wheel mode, so it looks like this when I'm choosing colors. You can do what works for you. So I can go and find exactly whatever color I'm looking for here on my rainbow. I can move up or down. I can just adjust values, saturation, whatever the hue is, or adjust the red, green, blue components of it. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to work. Back in the single mode, I find that this is just not as convenient for me when I'm trying to choose a color, or I have to manually choose colors on the right. So I like the multicolor mode option here. I can give it a name, so this would be yellow. Normally our color names correspond to what they're coloring: shirt, shoe, glove, skin, eye, lips, mouth, teeth. So we name our colors. Whoops, I chose blue apparently at the very end when I clicked on something, so we'll go back and choose a yellowish color. There, now we have yellow. So we can choose colors. We can then work with those colors, paint those colors. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that as you work with a color on here, the color, anywhere you've used the color in a project. So if I go on to now my next frame in my animation, and if I move on to my next frame and next frame and next frame, and remember, animation at its core is just simply change over time. That's really what animation is. It's as simple as that. Is I'm just creating change over time. Now I can move through this and see that this happens. Now if I go here and click on stop, so it now put my stop at frame 10. My animation is frame 1 to 10. If I turn on looping, I can just hit play and you can see how it goes very quickly. So that shows you that when we're animating change over time, we probably have to make that amount of change to be very small over time. Otherwise, things go really, really, really fast. Again, we don't want to just play with changing the frame rate here, because that ultimately doesn't benefit us when we're trying to export out and create an actual movie project. But one thing to keep in mind is if I work here and decide, I want that yellow not to be quite yellow, maybe I want it to be more on the oranger side of things. I want to make it darker. It's now more of a yellow ochre. I'll notice that it affected it across every frame that that color swatch has been used. So color swatches define their color wherever they're used on any frame in a project. So if I have 1,000 frames of animation, and if I update that swatch, it will update wherever that color appears across all 1,000 frames. So sometimes we'll think, oh, I'm just changing it on this one frame. If you know you need to change it on that one frame, you need to make a new color. So if I could just make a new color, and now I could make this one not as orange, now it's a little bit limer. And then I could use the paint tool to color that one shape different. So now, and I could color this one that. So we can see how we're able to affect things, but we need to make a new color. So that's just a little trap that sometimes people get into when they're working with it. Now, again, you have tool options while you're working. In the beginning, we'll probably just be using the paintbrush or the pencil tool to work. You can see the pencil tool. I'm just going to choose a different color as I draw with the pencil tool. The pencil tool, normally we're using that to create more of a consistent width line, a little less expressive than what we see here with the variable width line. So I'm creating that more consistent option. Now, when we look at it, we do have our smoothing that we can choose. So if you find that you have a shaky hand while you're working, if we turn that way up, you'll see how it starts to, we see the line adjusting itself as I draw. But I'm never going to get, I can't really get a line that's super shaky. Now if I turn off centerline smoothing, we can see that now if I'm trying to get a smooth line and draw, say, a circle, it doesn't work as well. So typically you want to find a setting that works for the kind of line that you're trying to draw. Personally, for me, I find that somewhere in the neighborhood of about 15, give or take. So anywhere from 15 to 20 seems to be a sweet spot for how I move my hand when I draw. It's going to vary for you, and you can decide how you want it to be. But now when we look at the paintbrush, we'll see here we don't quite have that same option. So if I'm trying to, we don't get that center line smoothing, so that doesn't give us that same control as we're working. So each of the tools are going to give you something a little bit different. You need to figure out what's going to work best for you when you're trying to create within it. So once again, we can add colors if, and you can see the little minus there. So if I want to get rid of a swatch, I just hit minus and it goes away. Notice no warning. It didn't ask me, are you sure you want to do it? It just did it. So choosing colors is important. Working across your frames is important. Now, as we work on these frames, it can be difficult at times to keep our drawing in alignment. So sometimes while we're drawing, we need a guide to be able to see across our frames. Just want to point one thing out, that there are a lot of tools that we won't immediately talk about. You can go research those. You can go through the help documents. So you can go under help, choose online help. It brings you to the website, and you can look through topics in more detail. We will be discovering and learning about more and more tools and features and what all these different icons mean over time, but right now in the beginning, it's not important. So we're just trying to focus on the key things that we need. So our playback controls, we have our frames here. If I've created a frame and I don't like it, so I want to get rid of that, I can just select it and simply hit the delete key on the keyboard and it goes away. Now I can take the frame that was there, I can move it. Well, now notice that that frame actually is double wide because it now filled that gap. So my timeline doesn't like to have gaps. I can move a frame, so I move that drawing over to here, and now this one extended out its exposure to cover that. So when we're working with the timeline in the beginning, it can be a little bit frustrating. You're trying to get rid of things. In lieu of deleting drawings or frames off your timeline, which we certainly can, what I would encourage you to do is, if you want to get rid of something, is grab the black arrow, and now I can click and select it. I can hit delete, and now I can draw, gotta switch back to the brush tool, and now I can draw something else on that frame. That's an easier way, in my opinion, of working. We have our eraser tool here. Now the eraser tool, we can see how it erases as we would expect it to work. You can see how I have, it's showing me the size of my cursor. If yours doesn't do that, we're going to take a look at some of the preferences, because there are some preferences we may want to tweak to give you a little better experience while you're working inside of Harmony. So we'll take a look at what a few of those are. But with the eraser, I can erase things. Now there's a keyboard shortcut for making your brushes bigger and smaller, and you hold down the letter O. So it kind of looks like my cursor here. Hold O, and I can just drag, and now that just made my eraser really big. I can go back to my paintbrush, and I chose the setting that my paintbrush and eraser maintain the same size on them. So if I have a fat paintbrush, it will give me a fat eraser. Now the paintbrush is the same. I actually just changed tools accidentally. Hold down the letter O. I can just click and drag to make my brush a smaller size. And now if I go to the eraser tool, we'll see that it's at that same size. So if you are looking for that on Windows, under Edit, you will find your preferences. On the Mac, under Harmony Premium, you will find your preferences there. And there's a couple of options that we're going to want to add. So we have under Drawing, we have brush size cursor and synchronize eraser and brush. If I turn those off, now if I just click the red dot up here, or the X if you're on Windows on the right side to close it, it doesn't actually make that preference take effect. You have to click OK to make that happen. Now you'll see that if I have the paintbrush, I just get a crosshair, so I don't really know how big my brush is going to be ahead of time. And now if I make my paintbrush really big, and it works, grab my eraser tool, it's not matching the same size. So I like under Drawing to have brush size cursor and synchronize eraser and brush. That's personal preference. I usually have that on mine, but you can decide whether you want it or not. I have set my color to be the default with the multi-wheel, not the single, so I've changed that setting as well on mine. We'll look at some other preferences down the road, but those are ones that are different on mine. So if there is something where your Harmony is behaving differently, leave a note in the comments or send me a message and let me know that you're trying to figure out why yours is behaving differently. Okay, now down at the bottom here where I have, it says Drawing, if I want to add another drawing layer so I can work on that, I can just simply click on the plus and choose Drawing. I also have the option down here where we see the little triangle, circle, square, or some, I can't quite tell, but the red, yellow, blue, I click on that, and it now allows me to add a new drawing layer. So the way it works is we give it a name, so I could just go Drawing 2. Oh, can't have that bad of a typo. And now if I just hit add, it will add it. If I hit add and close, it will close this window. If I hit add, so I can leave this up, and I can add a bunch of layers where I just type in a name, hit add, type in a name, hit add, type in a name, hit add. I can also type in a name, hit the enter key or return key on my keyboard, and then that will keep adding them. And then when I'm all done, I hit close, or add and close. Now you can see I have a new drawing layer here. I'm going to choose a color I haven't used before. I'm going to go back and start at frame 1. Oh, I was thinking I was on with the paintbrush. Now I can go into frame 2 and a keyboard shortcut for moving to the next frame are comma and period. So I can use comma and period to just simply move to the next or previous frame. So that can be an easy way to navigate while you are drawing, so that you don't have to draw something, click down in the timeline, draw something again, click down in the timeline, because ultimately that's just not really fun. So now I have 11 frames, so I just changed my stop to be 11. Now you can see how that works. Now if I turn off my first layer and just look at the green ball, we can see how it's working. So you may be thinking, it's like, okay, this is great, but it's really hard to line things up from frame to frame to frame. How do I go about doing that? And what we do is we use the onion skin tool. So the onion skin tool relates back to how animators used to work, where they worked on a light table. They had translucent paper that they did their drawings on, and then they could see the drawing, the previous drawing, from underneath. So I'm just going to add in a new layer here, and if I don't even give it a name, I hit return, and now I can close out of there. I just called it drawing 1. So you can't have layers with the same name. That's one of the key things. Harmony requires the layers to have separate names. So I'm going to turn on onion skinning. And the way onion skinning works, if I move out a little bit, we'll see from my CTI, or the playback head here, you can see where it's showing me red to the left, green to the right. And what the red is showing me is it's going to show me 2 frames prior and then 2 frames in the future while I am working. So now on this new layer, I'll just go grab a new color. I'm going to go grab my paintbrush again, hold down O, make my brush a little bit smaller. Now this time, if I were to draw a box and now move to the next frame, you'll see it shows red. So that red is the previous frame. If I go ahead another frame, you can see how it's a little bit grayer. Go ahead one more, it disappears. So now if I wanted to have my box be approximately the same between those 2 frames, and now move to the next frame, and maybe this time I am going to pull the top down just a hair, and I'm just repeating this. So I'm trying to make much more subtle changes in my artwork across time. Now, one thing that is going to be happening here is I will be creating a little bit of what is called a line boil, because my lines are changing. They're not exact from frame to frame. So this is an animation. Actually, some techniques aim to create that. Now, if I bring back and look here, you can see how there's the green edges showing frames in front, and the red is showing frames behind. Now, I just saw a little flash on screen. That is because I have autosave turned on Harmony. So that is a setting in the preferences that is not a bad idea. So I have it set to save every 10 minutes. If you have that turned off and Harmony crashes on you, you'll lose everything that hasn't been saved. Now, I've pulled up my Finder window, and I just want to show this is the folder. Remember, I called my project Harmony Overview, and when it saves it saves all of these files. So we have one file, it's the .xstage file. That is the actual project file. These little extra files, the .aux, and with the little kind of squiggle after it, all of those are temporary files that are added while a project is open. Then they disappear when you close the project. Now, if we have set it up for export so that we have set up our write node for how we want it to export, that goes into our jobs folder. We have the frames folder where when we actually test render the frames, they will show up there. Now if I click under elements, you can see under elements it has a .tgv file for each frame that I have drawn, and the naming corresponds to the folder, then the frame, and which frame is there. So that's the actual artwork that is happening for each of my things. The palette that I'm working with is going to be here, so I have the palette that I'm working on. So it's important when you are working in Harmony is if you want to move a project around, say from one computer to another, you want to send it to someone, you have to take the project folder. You can't just send the Xstage file, you have to send the entire project folder, and it needs to be zipped. And if you want to put it up on OneDrive, so if you use OneDrive and Google Drive and things like that, if you don't zip it before you put the folder up there, it usually corrupts the contents in that folder. So we've learned that lesson the hard way. It's really, really important that you right-click on your folder, and on a Mac it's compress, and on Windows you would choose send to compressed archive, and when you do that, that creates a .zip file. That .zip file is safe to put on OneDrive, safe to put on Google Drive, and it can survive transport. So it's really important to do that when you're moving it through cloud-based services. If you've just saved this on your hard drive, and it's a portable hard drive, you can move that from machine to machine, and generally there's no issues with that. So that is just something to keep in mind while you are working. All right, so that was just a little brief sidetrack. Now back to our project, so you can see how the line kind of has this, it's called boil, where it slowly changes across frames. Now if I hit play, you'll see how that frame is animating. If I turn off the green one, so we can see those frames occurring across time. So it's really important while you're working to test regularly and test often of how fast is my animation happening. So I'm just going to make a new drawing layer here. Now let's say I want to animate ball. Now something else to keep in mind is on my document we'll see that I have this frame here. I'm going to click down at the bottom, and that now turns on this background which shows me, so that is my actual project while I'm working. If I turn back on my layers, you can see their size relationship. So if I wanted to say animate a ball, so I'm going to first I'm going to make my brush much smaller. Let's see, yeah, that'll work. So I'm going to start at frame 1, and I am going to actually, this layer here, I'm going to let this just be the ground so it's easier for me to see what's going on. I'm going to just draw a line. Now I'll add in another layer. This is going to be my ball. So if I want to name a layer after I've created it, I can just double click on the text, just call that ground, ball. Now the ground, we'll notice, disappears after frame 1. Now if I turn off onion skinning, we'll see that is indeed true. So what we need to do is we need to extend out the ground so the ground exists for more frames. So we want it to be around longer. And we can do that. There's ways to do that where we now can all right, I forget where it is in the pull down, but under, if I right click on it, we have an option for extend exposure. And we have a function key F5. We can use that. Otherwise, we can choose to extend things out. We can, if we just select the frame here and right click, we'll see under exposure, it shows me that plus and minus, and that's plus and minus on my numeric keypad. So if you have a full extended keypad, that's how that's going to work. So if I click here and hit the plus, we can see how now it extends. Notice how we don't see individual boxes, we just see one fat box. So what it is this is a drawing, the ground that is now existing or exposed for more frames. So I'll just extend it out to frame 11. Now, if I go to the ball, this time I'll go back and choose my blue color. I'll create that ball. Now if I move to the next frame, turn back on onion skinning, so that's the little red with the eyeball, and then we see the kind of the red bucket underneath. Now if I decide, oh, I want this ball to move across the screen, so I go on to the next frame here and do that, well, notice it happens very, very quick. If I turn off onion skinning and hit play, so that's not, I mean, yes, that's animating, it's changing over time, but that's not doing it very effectively. So I'm just going to delete that. Let's go grab my paintbrush, turn back on onion skinning. So what we want to do is figure out timing. So if I want this ball to move a little bit, move over one frame. If I want it to move a little bit, over one frame. And onion skinning also helps us to be able to see the artwork so we can better maintain consistency of size and form as we go. Now if I start speeding this up, so we can see how if I hit play, and it starts out slow and then it's going faster. So it's probably, as it goes fast, is going really fast here. So that could be too much change, or we just need to have more animation happen so it doesn't loop right away to the next frame. So we can certainly take our ground and extend it out. Now, a fast way, instead of hitting plus every time, is I can just click all the way out at the end of my scene and use the function key F5, and that extends it out. We can see how now that ground extends out. If I go back to the ball and decide, all right, time to draw the next ball, move over a frame, draw the next ball. So we can start changing how much change is happening over time, because that is what animation is about. Again, it's that change over time. We can see my autosave kicked in. I'm just going to hit a stop right here. So now I'm at frame 39, go back to frame 1, and we can see how it starts out slow, goes fast, and then it starts slowing down. So as you start to figure out time, you're really trying to figure out, how do we want things to move? And there's different ways that we can go about doing this. So again, we've learned about adding in layers here. We've set up some custom colors. I'm going to just create a new color based on blue, but I want it to just be a little more magenta-ish purple. I'm going to turn off that ball layer for now and add in another drawing layer. And close. Go back to frame 1. First, what I want to do is I'm going to use black. And what I want to do is plan out a path. So I want to plan out a path. Now, what is that path? What's following that path? I haven't fully decided on that one yet. We'll extend it out. Again, function key F5, click at the end, hit F5, extends it out. Now I'll just add another drawing layer. This time I'm going to now use that purple. What I want to do back at frame 1 is I'm just going to, now I want to go back to my paintbrush, and I'm just going to put a line here. And I'll go 1 frame, and I'm following this path that I made, and this is part of why I drew the path ahead of time. Now if I don't change a lot each frame, we'll see how it slows down here. And now what I can do, I'm going to change a lot, but I'm making it so I changed the shape of it as I made it show a lot of change over time. Now I'm moving it a little bit, but it's not changing much over time. So we can see how and that's the end. Okay. Now if I hit play, we'll see how that purple moved. If I even turn off the path, it's easier to see how we're creating that motion. So notice by changing the length of this line, and moving it a lot, it helps to smooth and create an engaging motion with it. Turn back on my path, and just going to add in another drawing layer here. This time I'm going to follow. Oh, don't want to use red when red is my onion skin color. Oh, don't really need the onion skin color, I guess, on this one, because we're just following the purple. I'm just going to demonstrate that if we don't change, distort what we're working on based on speed. So I'm going to just keep drawing this segment. So every time it's about the same length. So we can see each time it's going through here, it's always about. Now if I run both of these layers at the same time, it's probably going to look kind of fun. And we can also realize it's like, gee, it'd be nice if my scene was longer than 60 frames. And you may be thinking, okay, I'm sure there's a way to do that. How do I go about doing that? And just, well, if I need to make my scene longer, I can just grab here at the end and it makes it longer. If I go under scene and choose scene length, I can choose a number. So if you need to make a project that's 120 frames long, you can just change it to 120 right there. I can also just grab this and pull it longer. I can also pull this back, and that effectively reduces the length of my scene. It doesn't delete any artwork that's there. It just reduces what my actual scene length is, but the moment I extend it out, you will see that my scene is there. So we can see how we're able to adjust it. So I'm going to just pull it back to 60 because that's how long my scene is. So now we're back to, or it was 59. Let me pull it to 59. There we go. So now my scene is the 59 frames. So if we hit play and watch it go, turn off the lines. If we look at just the yellow one when it's short, when it goes fast, you see it almost strobing. But if we look at the purple version, it almost seems to be more fluid when it's going faster because I drew a longer segment. So these are just small little things to think about while you're working to try to enhance and make a project more interesting to observe and interesting to watch so that it engages you. Now if we go and turn back on the ball, we can see there's the ball moving. So with the ball, when it goes really fast, probably need to have a little different solution. Maybe the ball needs to change shape. Maybe it needs to stretch. These are all things that we can do to enhance what is happening inside our scene. Now, if we look at this scene and this project and want to see it as a finished movie, we can simply go under Export and choose Export Movie. And when we do that, we have lots of different options here. Now I am going to browse where I want it to go, and I will just choose the current file that I'm working on, and I'll just put it into my jobs folder. Give it a save it. You can see that we have different options. Do the H.264 MPEG because that makes a smaller file. If you need QuickTime because you want to have transparency, you can do that because that does give you options of how you want it to. So if we do QuickTime ProRes on here, we now do have options for choosing to include alpha with it. So that is something that we can do if you wanted to do a video with alpha. So now it's saving it out with the name that I chose when I chose where to save it. We can export a specific number of frames here, so we don't have to export our whole movie if we didn't want to. And now I can hit OK. And it's now exporting out my project. And if I go to that project, we can take a look at it. You'll notice it has a black background. But when we worked in Harmony, and if I turn off the extra frame there, it has a gray background. So when we're in Harmony, it shows us gray. But by default, the background is black. So this is, in essence, a black transparent background. So if we want to add in a background so that this now has background to it, what I'm going to do is under my plus, I'm going to insert a color card. Now a color card inserts a background. Now you can see how it's a special kind of layer. I'll make my layer section bigger. And this layer, when we look at it, we see when it's selected, it shows us these little squares indicating we've selected the color card layer. If I choose any other layer, they go away. So that helps you to know that when you choose the color card layer, you're like, oh, I have a color card selected. By default, it comes in white. If I double click on the little star next to the word color card, it pulls this up. Now, if I want to mix colors using RGB values and I know how to do that by hand, that's great. I can also just click there and now choose a specific color. So if I wanted my background, oh, that's horrible, to be a specific color, I can now choose that color. Again, I can use the single wheel mode if that's your preference. I like the multi-wheel mode. It's always up to you for how you want to choose your color. But now that I've chosen that color card, I hit OK. And we can see now it shows what those red, green, blue values are. I hit close. Now color card, I don't extend out for frames or anything. It just draws that color across the whole background. And I can have artwork layers, so I could just draw a big box and fill it, use the paint bucket and fill it with the color. I could certainly do that on a drawing layer. And we'll probably have, on more complex projects, multiple layers. We'll have things in the background composed of multiple layers. We'll have middle ground layers. We'll have foreground layers. We'll have character layers, all kinds of different layers to build out the project. But the color card gives us a good starting point. So now, if I export my movie, and I'll just call this one Demo CC for color card, and now hit OK. And let's now close that one. Now if we look at Demo CC, we can see that that one has that purple background. Notice the only layers that showed up are the layers I had selected. So while I was in Harmony, I did not have that layer turned on. I didn't have these layers turned on. So they didn't render into the movie. So it only renders the layers that are selected. So you don't have to specifically say, don't render these layers whether you turn the eyeballs on or off, which is how some programs work. In Harmony, we don't have to do that. So hopefully this is enough information for you to get started, to have fun, to be adventurous. Don't be afraid to try things, because if you mess up your windows while you're clicking on things and moving things around, just remember, restore the default workspace. If your timeline gets super junked and you have layers you don't care about, oh, we're restoring the workspace. Let's try that again. I didn't mean to, but I accidentally did. If we have layers we don't want, we can certainly just take those layers. So if I now know I don't want this layer, and I can just hit the minus button and it goes away. Now do be aware that Harmony does not give you any kind of warning of, are you sure you want to get rid of that? If it assumes if you clicked on it you wanted to, otherwise you can click up here and choose undo. You can see that it keeps track of that undo to a pretty lengthy list. So that's pretty substantial on your undos that you can go back to. Or you can grab undo off the menu here, and of course Command Z for something that you've done quickly. Be bold, be brave, and have fun animating. Good luck.